I knew I was invisible the day my boss, Daniel, raised a glass at the quarterly meeting and toasted, "Another record-breaking year, flawless performance across the board." His voice carried across the sleek conference room, polished wood table gleaming under harsh fluorescent light. Applause erupted, laughter spilled, but not a single glance turned my way. That flawless performance? It was me. The late-night bug fixes that kept us from crashing mid-demo. The 3 a.m. server patching while my daughter's school recital played on mute in a corner of my laptop screen. The quiet fixes no one saw. The disasters averted before anyone else even realized there was a problem. The product bore the company's logo, but the lifeblood running through its veins was mine. I didn't need recognition, at least not at first. I told myself I was fine being the silent backbone. But it's funny how invisibility shifts from safety to suffocation once you notice it. Daniel noticed it, of course. He thrived on it. He wasn't the type to scream or pound the table. He didn't have to. He'd just lean back in his overpriced ergonomic chair, cross his legs, and tilt his head like a disappointed teacher. Then came the dagger. "Mia, why didn't you think of that earlier?" A simple question, sharp enough to slice the air in front of a dozen colleagues. He framed it like curiosity, but everyone knew what it was. A public sting disguised as feedback. And what do you do when your paycheck depends on that sting? You laugh along. You nod. You file it away with all the other slights you pretend don't matter. I filed away a lot of things. Like the time Daniel joked during a team happy hour. If Mia ever left, the system might wobble for 5 minutes before we replace her with someone cheaper. Everyone laughed. I laughed too. But the words burned into the back of my mind, tucked away alongside the memory of his smirk. That smirk. It became the punctuation mark of my career. Whenever a project succeeded, Daniel was front and center in the company newsletter, arms folded in front of a whiteboard filled with my handwriting. Afterwards, he'd pat my shoulder and say, "You're a real team player, Mia." As if I should wear the words like a medal, when really they felt more like handcuffs. He played people like chess pieces. One of my colleagues, a senior developer, suddenly found her projects rerouted to junior staff until she had nothing left on her plate. 6 weeks later, she resigned. Daniel acted shocked, as if she had ghosted him out of nowhere. But everyone knew. Keeping people off balance made them easier to control. And me? I stayed quiet. I kept showing up, notebook open, eyes down. The dependable one. The safe pair of hands. The person you called at 2 a.m. when the system imploded. But there's a strange power in being underestimated. Daniel thought he held all the cards, that I was just another cog. What he didn't realize was that while he was busy maneuvering pieces on his little chessboard, I was playing a different game entirely. A longer one. Back then, I didn't know how or when the tables would turn. I only knew one thing. Someday, the moment would come. And when it did, I wouldn't raise my voice. I wouldn't throw a scene. I'd do what I'd always done. Prepare quietly, meticulously, until the final move was inevitable. Still, I didn't expect it to begin the way it did. It was a Tuesday, because of course it was. Bad news always seems to hit hardest on Tuesdays, when it's too late to recover from Monday and too early to look toward Friday. I had just finished untangling a catastrophic memory leak that had been bleeding server performance for months when Daniel's assistant appeared at my desk, tapping her tablet like she was reading off a death sentence. "Daniel wants to see you in his office. HR will be there." That combination, boss plus HR, isn't a meeting. It's an execution. His corner office loomed like a glass cage, perched above the open floor like a hunter's blind. Walking toward it felt like crossing a stage. Keyboards slowed, conversations hushed, every pair of eyes flicked up just long enough to register. Someone's going down. Daniel was lounging back when I walked in, one ankle propped casually over his knee, a man rehearsing nonchalance. Beside him sat a woman from HR with a folder in her lap, her smile the kind you wear when the outcome has already been decided. "Let's get right to it," Daniel said smoothly, as if closing a routine sale. We're restructuring, and unfortunately that means we'll have to let you go. HR slid the termination packet across the desk like a waiter presenting a bill. Effective immediately, she added, her tone dripping with finality. And then came Daniel's flourish. His lips curved into that all-too-familiar smirk as he added, "Pack your things and don't forget your stupid plant." The words landed harder than the termination itself. That plant, a little pothos I'd nursed through office relocations and winters when the heat barely worked, had survived everything. It was more alive than my career in that moment, and Daniel had turned it into a punchline. Security escorted me out. My badge was deactivated before I even reached the lobby. People stared without speaking, the silent audience to the end of a show they'd been watching for years. To Daniel, this was checkmate, the final insult. But as I stepped into the crisp evening air, clutching a cardboard box with my plant swaying inside, I wasn't broken. I wasn't panicked about mortgages or resumes, because tucked away at home in a folder Daniel had no idea existed was something he could never laugh off, something that would make his power games look like child's play. And the next morning, he'd find out just how wrong he was. 2 years before Daniel smirked across that glass desk and told me not to forget my stupid plant, I was hunched over my own kitchen table at 1:15 in the morning. The apartment was dark except for the bluish glow of my laptop. An empty takeout container sat pushed to the side, cold noodles stuck to the lid, and my daughter's school drawings were scattered under my elbow. She was asleep in the next room, her breathing soft and steady. Meanwhile, I was wide awake, chasing an idea that wouldn't let me rest. It wasn't even part of my job description. Not officially. Nobody had asked me to work on it. But sometimes when a problem nags at you long enough, it stops feeling optional. You either solve it or it eats you alive. Our system was bloated. Years of quick fixes layered over one another like duct tape on a cracked pipe. Processes looped endlessly. Data crawled through inefficient pathways, and every time we scaled for a new client, costs ballooned. On the surface, everything worked fine. But fine was costing the company millions in wasted processing time. I couldn't stop thinking, what if there's a cleaner way? So I tinkered. Nights, weekends, stolen minutes while reheating leftovers. I filled notebooks with sketches, diagrams, half-baked formulas. And then one night, it clicked. A leaner framework, stripped of redundancies. Elegant in its simplicity. When I ran the first test, my laptop fan whirred like a jet engine. Then the numbers appeared on the screen. 30% less resource usage, no loss of speed. My hands hovered above the keyboard, heart hammering. It was like opening a secret door in a house you thought you knew. I sat there in silence for a long time, staring at the result. I knew exactly what I had. And more importantly, I knew what it wasn't. It wasn't the company's. I'd written it on my own hardware. Every line was mine. No borrowed code, no overlap with work projects. Just me, a stubborn problem, and too many sleepless nights. The next week, I filed a provisional patent. My name, my claim, my protection. It wasn't dramatic. Just a digital submission, a timestamp, a confirmation email that landed quietly in my inbox. But that confirmation felt heavier than anything Daniel had ever handed me in the office. I didn't tell anyone. Not my team, not my boss. Not even the colleague I trusted most. It wasn't about secrecy. It was about survival. I'd seen how quickly ideas became company property once they passed through the wrong hands. For months, the patent just sat there. Insurance. A flag planted in soil no one else realized was valuable yet. Until one lunch break changed everything. It was casual, unintentional. I was chatting with another engineer, half distracted when I mentioned my side project. Not the details, just the concept. A cleaner structure, a way to trim excess processes. He nodded politely. Conversation moved on. I didn't think much of it. 2 months later, I saw it. A new update rolled into production. Buried inside the release notes was a familiar skeleton. Not my exact code, but my method, my structure, my fingerprints in someone else's work. My stomach sank. They hadn't stolen it outright, not in a way that would hold up in court, but they'd absorbed the idea, pieced together their own version, and pushed it live. I went to legal, sat in a bland office across from a lawyer who didn't even look up from his laptop as I explained. "Since you haven't commercialized it independently," he said flatly, "it's not really relevant." Translation: if it's not making you money, we don't care. I walked out with two truths carved into my mind. 1. They didn't see the value. 2. They didn't realize how much they were building on top of it. Because once the door had opened, they charged right through it. Over the next year, my framework spread like wildfire. First, it anchored a client-side tool. Then it became the backbone of a new analytics feature Daniel bragged about at a tech conference in San Diego. Eventually, it wove itself into the company's very core, invisible but essential, like steel beams hidden inside concrete. Every release, every update, leaned harder on the architecture I'd sketched at my kitchen table, and every time it did, I logged it. Not as revenge. Not yet. As insurance. Dates, versions, dependencies, public announcements cross-referenced with my provisional filing. Piece by piece, I was building a record. Proof that the very foundation of Daniel's empire was rooted in something that didn't belong to him. I told myself I wasn't planning anything. I was just protecting myself. But deep down, I knew better. I wasn't powerless, no matter how invisible Daniel made me feel in meetings. I wasn't replaceable, no matter how many jokes he cracked about cheaper contractors. Because somewhere in my desk drawer, a folder was getting thicker. And someday, whether by choice or by force, I'd need to open it. For now, I kept showing up, nodding when Daniel raised his eyebrow, smiling when he smirked, filing everything away. What no one knew was that the real game had already started. And when the time came, the company wouldn't just lose me. They'd lose the ground under their own feet. The folder in my desk drawer grew thicker as the months passed. Every product launch, every press release, every shiny new feature Daniel paraded in front of clients was another line in my logbook. Another brick stacked neatly into a wall he didn't realize he was building around himself. At first, I told myself I was just protecting my work. But there was a moment when protection shifted into something sharper. It was a Thursday morning, gray and drizzling, when I caught Daniel on stage at an industry summit. His voice came through the live stream as I sat in the back corner of our office, my headphones on, pretending to code. He was smiling wide, gesturing at slides full of graphs I had made, diagrams I had drawn, bullet points lifted straight from my documentation. "This innovation," he said, "is what sets our company apart. It's the backbone of everything we've achieved this year." He said it like he'd stayed up at 1 a.m. chasing solutions on a secondhand laptop. Like it was his breakthrough, his burden, his sleepless nights. The audience clapped. Investors leaned forward. And I sat there with my headphones staring at my screen, realizing something cold. Daniel wasn't just standing on my work. He was making himself the face of it. That was the day I called Victor. Victor was an intellectual property attorney I'd met years earlier, back when I toyed with a side project that never left the drawing board. He was the kind of man who could turn a legal document into a scalpel. Precise, surgical, dangerous if you weren't careful. We met in his cramped office, the kind where filing cabinets leaned like tired soldiers and the carpet still smelled faintly of cigarette smoke from the 90s. I slid the folder across his desk. "It's time," I said. He raised an eyebrow but didn't ask questions. Instead, he flipped through the documents, page after page of logs, timestamps, screenshots, patent filings. His brow furrowed in concentration, the way a doctor studies an X-ray. "Did you write this entirely outside of work hours?" he asked eventually, still scanning. "Every line," I said. "My laptop, my commits, my timestamps. I've got the receipts." He nodded slowly. "Good, because once this goes in, there's no gray area left. You'll own it outright. No company claim, no wiggle room. And if they've been using it..." "They have," I cut in, my voice steady. It's already in production. Victor leaned back, tapping the papers against his desk. Then they're already in violation. We spent the next 3 hours sharpening every clause, stripping out any ambiguity that could be twisted later. The language was clean, airtight, brutal in its clarity. This was my intellectual property, developed independently, protected under U.S. law. Any use without a licensing agreement would constitute infringement. By the time Victor slid the final draft back to me, my chest felt tight, not from fear, but from something colder, something deliberate. This is a landmine, he said. Once it's filed, it sits there quietly until someone steps on it. Then it explodes. I signed in ink that bled slightly into the paper fibers. Then let's file it. That afternoon, the provisional patent became a full patent. No announcement, no celebration, just a quiet submission, a confirmation email, and the knowledge that the spring I'd been winding for 2 years was now loaded tight. After that, every time Daniel strutted into the office with that smug grin, bragging about his innovation, I heard the faint tick of the clock. Every client deal, every newsletter shout-out, every speech he gave was another turn of the screw. He thought he was building a castle. I knew he was stacking kindling. And then came the whispers. First, I heard my name in passing, muttered in break rooms, tacked onto emails I wasn't supposed to see. Words like downsizing and restructuring started floating around. One afternoon, a coworker I trusted pulled me aside. "Daniel's been asking weird questions," she whispered, "about what you're working on, about whether your role is essential." Essential. The word hit like a slap. I was the person keeping their system from collapsing, but Daniel had convinced himself I was expendable. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop open, my daughter asleep down the hall, and I stared at the screen for a long time. Was I scared? Maybe a little. But fear wasn't the loudest voice anymore. What I felt was something closer to inevitability. Daniel thought he was circling me, setting me up for elimination. He had no idea the trap was already built, the pin already pulled. I didn't need to fight him in the open. I didn't need to shout or beg. All I had to do was wait. Because when the axe finally fell, and I knew it was coming, Daniel wouldn't just be cutting me loose. He'd be stepping straight onto the landmine with his own name stamped on the top of it. When Daniel told me to pack my things and don't forget your stupid plant, security already waiting by the door, he thought he was delivering the final blow. He thought he'd strip me of everything. My badge, my title, my dignity. But what he didn't realize was that the real ending hadn't even begun. I walked out that evening with my box under one arm, the pothos plant swaying gently as if it knew something Daniel didn't. People stared, eyes flicking up from screens, pretending they weren't watching. I kept my head level, my pace steady. No goodbyes. No tears. Because while Daniel smirked from his glass office, thinking he'd won, the truth was simple. He'd already lost. That night, I didn't rage or drown myself in wine or draft desperate emails to recruiters. I sat at my kitchen table, the same table where I'd first sketched out the framework that had quietly become the backbone of the company. The termination packet Daniel handed me was shoved off to the side like a bad menu. My laptop sat open, cursor blinking. I scrolled through my contacts until I landed on a name I hadn't dialed in months. Ellen Rodriguez, VP of Product at our biggest competitor. We'd met years earlier at a tech conference in Chicago, bonded over overpriced coffee and terrible Wi-Fi. Since then, we'd traded the occasional message. Harmless jokes, bits of industry gossip. But Ellen wasn't just sharp. She had vision. She knew how to spot opportunity before anyone else. I hit call. It rang twice. Then her voice came through, warm but curious. "Mia? Well, this is a surprise. To what do I owe the pleasure?" I didn't waste time. "I've got something you'll want to see." Her tone shifted instantly. "Go on." I explained in careful strokes. Independent development. Clean chain of custody. Fully granted patent in my name. And the kicker, The company she'd been battling for years had built their core technology on top of it without legal rights. Silence on her end for a beat. Then, a slow exhale. Send me everything, now. Within minutes, encrypted files were in her inbox. I could hear the faint rustle of papers as she flipped through the PDFs, even though I knew she was staring at a screen. It's clean, she muttered, almost to herself. And they've been using this for how long? 18 months minimum, I said. I heard her laugh softly, low and dangerous. Pull it and their back end grinds to a halt. My voice was steady. I'm open to licensing, exclusively. We spent the next hour sketching terms, licensing fees, exclusivity clauses, non-disclosure agreements. Ellen didn't haggle. She knew speed mattered more than pennies. Every hour before the deal closed was another hour Daniel's company could stumble onto the ticking bomb beneath their feet. By midnight, contracts were moving through her legal department like wildfire. By 2 a.m., I had a signed agreement in my inbox. And by the time I finally closed my laptop, leaning back in my chair, the game was no longer theoretical. It was already over. The next morning, Daniel must have strutted into the office thinking he'd finally rid himself of me. Maybe he even joked about it in the break room. She'll be replaced in a week. But at 9:12 a.m., his world cracked open. Ellen's company issued a press release. Nexus Systems secures exclusive rights to breakthrough algorithm powering next-generation systems. No mention of Daniel's company by name. None needed. Anyone in the industry knew exactly whose foundation just got ripped out from under them. By 10 a.m., the news was everywhere. Trade journals, tech blogs, LinkedIn feeds, each repost carrying whispers. Wait, isn't that the tech Daniel's company has been bragging about? By 11, the stock dipped 6%. Not catastrophic, but enough to send investor relations scrambling. And then the phone calls started. My friend from accounting, one of the few people I trusted there, sent me texts in a steady stream. 10:23 a.m. CTO is losing it. 10:41 a.m. Conference call on speaker, whole floor can hear. 10:47 a.m. He's tearing into Daniel right now. I could picture it perfectly. The big conference room, blinds half closed, coffee cups scattered, executives pale and silent. The CTO's voice booming over speakerphone. What I don't understand, Daniel, is why your name is on this patent, and why, as of this morning, it's licensed exclusively to our biggest competitor. My friend typed every word, each one sweeter than the last. Apparently, there was a pause long enough for everyone to hear papers rustling, Daniel fumbling. Then his stammered reply, It was part of the documentation process. I supervised. The CTO cut him off. You insisted on attaching your name. And now every investor thinks you handed our core technology to the competition. Personally. Silence. Then the knives turned. The room wasn't looking at the CTO anymore. They were looking at Daniel. In rooms like that, perception is everything. If your name is on the problem, you are the problem. By noon, industry blogs had headlines. From innovation to implosion, how one exec gift-wrapped tech for a rival. Daniel had spent years making me invisible. Now he couldn't disappear if he tried. That evening, as Daniel's empire unraveled, I watered the pothos plant he'd mocked. Its leaves were larger now, green and thriving, curling along the rim of the pot. My phone buzzed again. Another text from my friend in accounting. Emergency board meeting. Daniel looks like he aged 10 years overnight. I pictured him sitting there, sweat soaking through his shirt, watching the board tally up the millions in damage. Watching investors demand answers. Watching clients threaten to walk. And the best part? I hadn't raised my voice. I hadn't broken a single law. I'd simply exercised a right I'd secured 2 years earlier when no one cared enough to notice. Revenge, I realized, isn't about fireworks. It isn't about shouting or storming out. It's about precision, about patience, about letting the arrogant ones dig their own graves while you quietly hold the shovel. By the end of the week, Daniel was gone. Officially resigned, But everyone knew the truth. He'd gone from the face of innovation to the scapegoat of disaster in less than 72 hours. The company scrambled to spin the narrative, to reassure investors, to beg clients for patience. But the damage was permanent. They'd built their empire on a foundation that didn't belong to them, and now it was gone. Me? I didn't gloat. I didn't post cryptic messages online or brag to old colleagues. I just kept living my life. My daughter and I had breakfast together without me checking server logs on my phone. I walked her to school, sunlight on my face, the world suddenly lighter. And every morning I watered the plant. It wasn't just alive, it was thriving. Daniel once thought it was a punchline, a symbol of what I'd lose when he cut me loose. But to me, it became something else entirely. Proof that what's overlooked, dismissed, and mocked can grow into something unstoppable. That's the message I carried forward, the one I'd tell anyone who ever felt invisible in their own story. Sometimes the quietest person in the room isn't powerless. Sometimes they're the one holding the detonator. And when the time comes, all it takes is a steady hand, a thou, and a little patience to flip the board entirely. Ladies and gentlemen, let's raise a glass. The ballroom at the downtown hotel went silent as my boss, Richard Keller, stood at the podium. His voice boomed across the chandeliers and velvet curtains. Every face turned to him, champagne flutes glittering in their hands. It was supposed to be a night of celebration, the launch of our newest product line, the one I had poured 2 years of my life into, the one I'd sacrificed weekends, birthdays, and even the last few months of my marriage for. But Richard had other plans. "She's leaving," he said with a smirk, his eyes finding mine across the room. "She never really had what it takes." The room erupted in polite laughter and applause, like trained seals responding to their master's cue. My name wasn't even mentioned. I was just she, disposable. I felt my throat tighten, but I didn't flinch. I stood slowly, smoothed the hem of my blazer, and picked up the envelope I'd been carrying all evening. My hand didn't shake as I walked to the podium. "To Richard," I said, raising my glass. My voice was steady, almost calm. "From the company's biggest failure." I set the envelope in front of him and turned on my heel. No tears, no protest, just silence. Behind me, I heard the rip of paper, then Richard's voice breaking. "What the hell is this?" But I didn't stop walking. I should introduce myself. My name is Linda Harris. I was 43 years old, and until that night, I was the head of product development at Stonemount Technologies, one of Chicago's fastest-growing firms. For 11 years, I gave that company everything. I started as a junior analyst, stayed late when others left early, carried projects on my back while executives like Richard claimed the credit. And I believed in it. I believed that if I worked hard enough, if I proved myself, I'd earn the recognition I deserved. But I was wrong. 3 weeks earlier, Richard called me into his office. He leaned back in his leather chair, all false charm and manicured confidence. "Linda, you've been doing good work, but this launch, it needs a fresh face, energy, someone younger. We'll have Jason present instead." Jason, the intern I trained, a 25-year-old with good hair and no experience. I stared at Richard, waiting for the punchline. "Excuse me?" "You'll still be part of the team," he said with mock sympathy. "But it's time we show investors a more dynamic leader. Don't take it personally." Don't take it personally. That was the day I realized I had no future at Stonemount. Not because I wasn't capable, but because Richard had decided I was replaceable, disposable. What he didn't know was that I'd already seen the cracks in his empire. For months, I'd noticed irregularities in the reports. Product testing results that didn't line up, expenses signed off without proper documentation, inflated performance metrics in investor decks. Every time I brought them up, Richard waved me off. "You're overthinking again, Linda. Focus on the product." But my instincts told me otherwise. And I had learned long ago, instincts don't lie. So I started keeping records, copies of reports, email threads, meeting notes. Quietly, carefully. Not because I wanted revenge, not yet, but because something in my gut whispered that one day I'd need them. That day came sooner than I expected. The night of the launch, I knew what Richard was planning. The smirk, the toast, the dismissal disguised as a joke. He wanted to humiliate me, to show the board that he was in control, that he could push out the woman who had built the very product they were celebrating. But I wasn't going to leave quietly. The envelope I placed on the podium? It wasn't just paper. It was the culmination of 6 months of documentation. Evidence of manipulated product data, falsified safety certifications, and doctored investor reports. All under Richard's direction. Inside were copies of contracts and memos that proved our flagship product, the one they toasted that night, hadn't passed critical safety tests. That Richard had buried those results to rush the launch and impress investors. And I wasn't the only one who had them. When I walked out of that ballroom, past the clapping colleagues and the wide-eyed interns, I felt a strange calm settle over me. For the first time in months, I wasn't afraid. I didn't go home right away. Instead, I drove through the rain-slicked streets of Chicago, headlights blurring against the glass. My hands gripped the wheel, my mind replaying the sacrifices I'd made. The dinners I'd missed with my daughter Emma, the fights with my husband that eventually broke us. All for a company that had decided I was worthless. But they had underestimated me. Richard thought I'd crumble, that I'd accept the insult and fade away quietly. But he had no idea that I'd already contacted someone who was very interested in what I'd found. His laughter at the podium was still echoing in my ears when I pulled into my driveway. Only this time, I wasn't the one being laughed at, because Richard Keller had no idea how fast his empire was about to collapse. And I wasn't done yet. When I woke the next morning, sunlight streamed through the blinds, but there was no peace in it. My phone had already buzzed half a dozen times. Missed calls from Richard, 2 from our HR director, Marianne, 1 from a number I didn't recognize. I ignored them all. Instead, I made coffee and sat at my kitchen table, staring at the briefcase I'd brought home months earlier. Inside, beneath layers of ordinary paperwork, were files I'd been collecting since Richard took over as CEO 18 months ago. The first irregularities seemed small. Travel expenses signed without receipts, bonuses distributed without board approval. But then it escalated. Product safety results altered, emails instructing staff to reframe numbers before investor calls, contracts signed with suppliers that never delivered. I should have walked away then. But part of me believed I could fix it, that my job was to protect the company I had given more than a decade of my life to. Now, as I opened the briefcase, I realized this was no longer about protecting Stonemount. It was about protecting myself. And maybe, just maybe, protecting the people who trusted the company's products with their lives. By noon, the calls turned into voicemails. "Linda, it's Richard. We need to talk. You've made a mistake. This is Marianne from HR. Please call me back immediately. We need to discuss your exit paperwork." And finally, one that made my stomach twist. "This is Daniel Briggs, legal counsel for Stonemount Technologies. It's imperative you return the documents you removed. Failure to do so may result in legal action." Legal action. They were moving fast, but so was I. At 2 o'clock, I drove to the west side, to a small bank I'd opened a safe deposit box at years ago. The clerk greeted me with a smile, clearly recognizing me as a longtime customer. "Morning, Ms. Harris." I nodded politely and asked for access to my box. Inside, I placed duplicates of the most damning files. The falsified safety test results, the emails with Richard's initials approving them, the doctored investor presentation slides. I locked it up tight. I wasn't naive. I knew evidence in my home could disappear in a burglary. But evidence in a bank vault? That was harder to erase. When I returned to my car, I sat for a long moment, staring at the steering wheel. My heart thudded against my ribs. This wasn't a game anymore. Richard wasn't just trying to humiliate me at a party. He was trying to silence me. That evening, I called Emma, my daughter. She was 21, a senior in college, juggling classes and part-time work at a bookstore. "Mom, what's going on?" she asked the second she picked up. "I saw something online. People are saying you left Stonemount." I hesitated. I didn't want to worry her, but I also couldn't lie. "It's true. Richard pushed me out." "That's insane. You've given them everything." "I know." My throat tightened. "But listen, Emma, I need you to focus on school. Don't get involved in this." Silence stretched on the line. "Are you in trouble?" "No," I lied softly. "I'm handling it. I just need you to trust me." When we hung up, I sat in the quiet of my kitchen, staring at the phone in my hand. The truth was, I wasn't sure how much trouble I was in, but I knew one thing. Richard's panic meant I had more power than I'd realized. On Sunday, a black SUV idled outside my house for over an hour. I pretended not to notice, drawing the curtains and keeping the lights low. By the time it drove away, my decision was made. I couldn't fight Richard alone. I needed help. Someone outside Stonemount. Someone who wouldn't be intimidated by corporate lawyers or silenced by money. That night, I dug out an old contact card from the back of my desk drawer. It belonged to Sarah Levin, a former colleague who had left the industry years ago to work with a consumer safety watchdog group. We hadn't spoken in nearly a decade, but I remembered the last thing she said to me before leaving. "Linda, one day you'll realize some battles aren't meant to be fought inside the company. Call me when that day comes." It was time. My hands trembled as I dialed her number. After 3 rings, she answered. "Linda Harris," she said, her voice calm but firm, as if she'd been expecting this call all along. "Tell me what you've got." I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I pulled together a clean folder of evidence and notes, stripping away anything that could be dismissed as interpretation and leaving only hard facts. As the hours ticked by, I felt something shift inside me. Fear was still there, yes. But alongside it came clarity. Richard thought I was just a failure he could humiliate and discard. What he didn't understand was that failures don't usually have receipts. And by Monday morning, those receipts would be in the hands of people who knew exactly what to do with them. Monday morning arrived gray and heavy, the kind of Chicago day where the sky feels like concrete pressing down. I barely touched my coffee. My nerves weren't about caffeine. They were about the folder sitting in my bag and the meeting ahead. Sarah had been clear on the phone. "Bring only what you're comfortable losing. Keep the rest secure. We'll start with enough to get their attention." By 9 o'clock, I was walking through the revolving glass doors of a midtown office building, my heels clicking against the marble floor. The lobby directory read, "Consumer Safety Watch Alliance, Suite 1500. The receptionist greeted me warmly, as if I weren't just another stranger. "Ms. Harris? Sarah's expecting you." When I stepped into the conference room, Sarah rose from her chair with the same steady energy I remembered. Her hair was streaked with gray now, but her eyes were sharp, assessing. She hugged me briefly before motioning to 2 other people at the table. "This is Mark Collins, investigative journalist with the Tribune, and Alicia Morales, a litigation attorney who specializes in whistleblower protection." For a moment, my throat closed. This was bigger than I had imagined. I'd thought we'd talk strategy, maybe explore options. Instead, I was staring at 2 professionals who could take my story public and defend me in court. I placed the folder on the table. My voice was quiet, but firm. "This is just a fraction of what I've collected, enough to show a pattern." Mark leaned forward immediately, flipping through copies of test reports, email threads, and financial documents. His brows furrowed. "These safety certifications, if they're falsified, that's a huge liability. We're talking recalls, lawsuits, maybe even criminal charges." Alicia glanced up from her notes. "And your termination? When did that happen?" "Technically, they haven't processed it yet. Richard tried to push me out at the launch event. HR has been calling nonstop. Her lips tightened. Classic. They want you to sign something that waives your rights before you realize the leverage you have. Don't sign anything. Not a severance package, not a resignation. Sarah rested her hands flat on the table. Linda, you need to understand something. Once you step into this, there's no turning back. Richard will fight dirty. The company will paint you as disgruntled, unstable, anything to discredit you. Are you ready for that? I thought of Emma, of the years I'd missed bedtime stories and soccer games because I was chasing deadlines, of the envelope on Richard's podium, his smug face turning red, of the black SUV parked outside my house. Yes, I said quietly. I'm ready. The meeting lasted 3 hours. We mapped out next steps. Alicia would file for federal whistleblower protection, ensuring retaliation could be challenged legally. Mark would begin verifying the documents independently, but nothing would be published until we were secure. Sarah's group would prepare to notify regulators if the internal channels failed. By the time I walked out of the building, the weight on my shoulders hadn't disappeared, but it had shifted. I wasn't alone anymore. Still, fear lingered. That evening, while I cooked a simple dinner of pasta and salad, my phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't Richard or HR. It was Emma. Mom, are you okay? I saw another post online. Some guy claiming you were escorted out by security? My grip on the wooden spoon tightened. Don't believe everything you read. I wasn't escorted out. I walked out on my own. But, is it true? Did they really fire you? I hesitated. They tried. Let's just say I didn't make it easy. Emma sighed. I hate that they're treating you like this. You've worked so hard for them. I swallowed against the lump in my throat. That's exactly why I'm not letting them bury this. One day you'll understand why standing your ground matters, even when it costs you. There was a pause. Then her voice softened. I think I already do. At 9 o'clock sharp, a knock rattled my front door. I froze. Through the peephole, I saw Richard himself standing on my porch, his jaw tight, his tailored suit out of place in my modest neighborhood. Linda, open the door, he called, his voice sharp but forced calm. We need to settle this before it gets out of hand. I didn't move. My heart hammered in my chest, but I stayed silent. After a long moment, he pulled a thick envelope from his briefcase and slid it under the door. This is my final offer. Sign it and this all goes away. You'll be comfortable for the rest of your life. I waited until his car pulled away before picking it up. The severance offer was larger than before. 5 years' salary, a non-disclosure clause, immediate payout. But as I stared at it, I knew the truth. Comfort bought by silence wasn't comfort at all. I placed the envelope in the shredder. The sound of paper tearing was louder than his voice in my memory. That night, I lay in bed wide awake, listening to the hum of the refrigerator, the distant whoosh of traffic. Richard thought money would shut me up. He thought fear would keep me quiet. But the truth was bigger than my fear. Bigger than him. And by the end of the week, the world would know it. Tuesday started with a call from Alicia at 8:07 a.m., her voice crisp and awake in a way I wasn't. Filings are in, she said. Federal whistleblower protections requested. Formal complaints initiated with the Consumer Product Safety Commission and the SEC. Today is about preserving the record. Do not meet anyone from Stone Mount alone. Noted, I said, staring at the steam lifting off my coffee like a warning flare. By mid-morning, Sarah looped me into a secure video call with her team. 2 tracks, she said. Internal notice to Stone Mount's audit committee, so they can't claim surprise, and an external preservation request to their counsel. Once they're on legal notice, destroying evidence becomes a much bigger problem for them. A half hour later, my inbox pinged with a litigation hold notice from Stone Mount's outside counsel, instructing all employees to preserve emails, messages, drafts, even handwritten notes related to product testing and investor communications. I wasn't sure whether to feel relieved or afraid. A hold meant they knew this was real. Mark, the journalist, called after lunch. I'm still verifying. he said, measured, careful. I've spoken with 2 engineers who corroborate pressure on testing. One agreed to go on background if needed. I'm also chasing down the lab. The lab meant the independent facility contracted for thermal and battery tests. Late afternoon, Mark texted, "Lab manager won't comment, but gave me report IDs that match your copies. That's as close to confirmation as I'll get before publication." It was a small, sober victory. Wednesday brought a different kind of pressure. HR emailed to clarify that my employment status was under review and requested a meeting to discuss next steps and mutual options. Alicia replied on my behalf, "All communication through counsel." Minutes later, my phone lit up with a number I didn't recognize. "Ms. Harris, this is Robert Ames, chair of the audit committee. We'd like to speak with you. Today, if possible." "My attorney will coordinate," I said. He exhaled, the sound of a man who just realized the ground beneath him had shifted. That evening, Emma came by with takeout and concern in her eyes. We ate quietly at my kitchen table, the way we had when she was little, and homework spread between us like a second meal. "Are you scared?" she asked finally. "Yes," I said, because I wouldn't lie to her. But scared isn't the same as wrong. She reached for my hand. "I'm proud of you, Mom." Thursday moved faster. Alicia confirmed the SEC had acknowledged receipt and opened a matter number. The CPSC requested a preliminary call the following Monday. Sarah's team drafted a public statement I could release if Stonemount attacked me personally. Mark called at 5:20 p.m. "My editors greenlit a story for tomorrow morning," he said. "Careful language, multiple sources, documents reviewed. You won't be named beyond what's already public. Former head of product development. Are you ready?" No one is ready for their life to become a headline, but I said yes. I barely slept. At 6:03 a.m., Friday, my phone buzzed with the link. The headline wasn't dramatic. It didn't need to be. "Documents suggest safety concerns preceded product launch at Stonemount Technologies." The first paragraph said everything in plain English. Internal emails and test summaries indicated failing results. Leadership pressed to proceed anyway. Investors had received slide decks that omitted failure rates. By 7 a.m., my messages were a wall. Former colleagues, quiet thank yous from people who'd been afraid to speak, a curt no comment forwarded from Stonemount's PR team. At 7:42, a mass email went out to employees. "All external inquiries to PR. Do not delete any files." At 8:15, the company's website replaced the triumphant launch banner with a smaller sentence. "We are reviewing additional data and will provide an update." The celebration had turned into a pause. Richard left a voicemail at 8:31. I didn't need to listen to the whole thing to hear the rage. "You've made a grave mistake. You think anyone will hire you after this? You think you're a hero? You're a liability, Linda." Alicia texted me 2 minutes later. "Do not respond. We've preserved the voicemail." At 9:10, Mark sent a screenshot of Stonemount's statement. "We take safety seriously, we follow rigorous protocols, we categorically deny falsifying results." The usual choreography. Then, near the bottom, "We have placed one executive on administrative leave pending review." No name. They didn't need to spell it out for me. By noon, a second story appeared online. An analyst note, cautious but clear. "Short-term volatility expected. Governance risk elevated." Stonemount's stock dipped a few points. Nothing catastrophic, but enough to make the board feel heat. At 12:37, another email from the audit chair. "Formal request to meet Monday with the committee and outside counsel. Your attorney is welcome." I forwarded it to Alicia. "We'll attend on our terms," she wrote back. Full transcript, no off the record, and they provide their preservation actions in writing. Through the afternoon, the house felt too quiet. I washed dishes I'd already washed, folded the same towel twice. Around 3, Emma texted a photo of a handwritten sign in her campus bookstore window. "Be kind to the person in front of you. You don't know what they're carrying." I stared at it longer than made sense and felt my eyes burn. At 4:22 p.m., an unknown number flashed. I let it go to voicemail. A moment later, a text arrived from the same number. I can't call from work. They're moving files out of the shared drive to someone's personal archive. Check timestamps on QA folder Q4-launch. I'm sorry. A. I didn't recognize the initial, but the detail was too specific to ignore. I called Alicia immediately. If they're touching timestamps after a hold notice, it's serious, she said. Forward me everything. We'll inform council and regulators. Now. I forwarded the message to Sarah as well. She replied within minutes. We'll snapshot public-facing artifacts and note any changes. Don't confront anyone directly. As the winter light thinned, I sat in the living room without turning on a lamp. For months, maybe years, the truth had been something I carried alone, heavy and sharp. Now it was out in the world, documented, time-stamped, read by strangers over morning coffee. It should have felt like relief. Instead, it felt like standing in the doorway of a house after the fire's out, counting what's left. At 6:09 p.m., another email landed. This one from an address I didn't expect. rkeller@stonemountTech.com. No subject line, just a single sentence. You don't know what you've done. I closed my laptop and let the room go dark. He was wrong. I knew exactly what I'd done. And on Monday, in a glass-walled conference room with a court reporter and a dozen eyes on me, I would say it all again. Monday morning, the air inside Stonemount's headquarters was different. Gone was the bravado of product launches and investor calls. In its place, silence, broken only by the nervous shuffle of employees avoiding eye contact. Alicia walked beside me, her presence steady. We were escorted into the boardroom where a court reporter waited, fingers poised above the keys. Across the long table sat the audit committee, outside counsel, and Richard himself. His jaw was tight, his suit immaculate, but the confidence I once saw in him was gone. Ms. Harris, the chair began, thank you for attending. We want to assure you this meeting is about transparency. I didn't reply. I slid a smaller folder across the table. Alicia spoke for me. These are supplemental documents. Emails and reports already shared with regulators. We expect written confirmation of how the company intends to preserve all relevant evidence. Richard leaned forward, his voice sharp. You're destroying this company, Linda. Do you understand that? I met his eyes for the first time. No, Richard. You did that when you decided profit mattered more than safety. I just stopped you from burying it. The room went still. The court reporter's keys clicked, every word preserved. For the next 2 hours, I answered questions calmly, fact by fact. No speculation, no theatrics. Just the truth, documented in black and white. By the end, the board members avoided Richard's gaze, their silence louder than any verdict. When it was over, Alicia gathered our things. Outside the building, the winter air bit at my cheeks. She exhaled. That was it, Linda. You've done your part. Now it's theirs to untangle. Weeks later, headlines confirmed what we already knew. Stonemount announced a recall of its flagship product. Regulators launched full investigations. 2 board members resigned. And Richard Keller? Suspended pending federal inquiry. I wasn't named in the company's statements, but whispers traveled. Some called me a whistleblower, others a traitor. The labels didn't matter. I had Emma to think about, and the quiet certainty that I hadn't looked away when it counted. One evening, sitting with my daughter over takeout again, she asked softly, "Do you regret it?" I thought of the years I gave to Stonemount, of the sleepless nights, the humiliation at that launch. And then I thought of the folder, the court reporter, the truth laid bare. No, I said finally. I regret trusting the wrong people for too long, but I don't regret standing up when it mattered. Emma smiled faintly. That's what I'll remember, Mom. Not the company. You. And that, more than any pension or title, was the legacy I could live with.